The dawn broke over the New Mexico territory in 1859, not with a burst of hope, but with a cold, dry whisper. The wind swept down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, carrying the metallic scent of red dust and the ghost of a chill that lingered despite the coming sun. It rattled the loose shingles of the Whitmore ranch house and turned the blades of the windmill with a mournful, rhythmic creak that sounded like a labored heartbeat. Clara Whitmore stood on the porch, a mug of black coffee warming her calloused hands. At 24 years of age, she possessed a face that the sun and wind had already begun to etch with the fine lines of survival. She was not a delicate flower of the East, kept in a parlor to play the piano. She was a creature of this hard earth, forged by the necessity of holding a dying ranch together. She took a sip of the bitter coffee, her eyes scanning the horizon where the purple shadows of the mesas were retreating before the assault of the morning light. Inside the small, weathered house, her brother Noah slept. He was 12 years old, still soft in the face but hardening in the spirit, since their mother had passed 2 winters ago, leaving them with nothing but the land and the debts their father had accrued before his own departure. Clara had become both mother and father to the boy. She was the one who mended his trousers, but she was also the one who taught him how to calm a spooked horse and how to mend a fence line that had been cut by drifters or desperate cattle. The ranch sat on a precarious edge. To the east lay the dusty, growing settlement of Red Mesa, a cluster of timber and adobe that promised civilization but delivered mostly whiskey and commerce. To the west lay the vast, open country, the hunting grounds of the Dine, the people the white settlers called the Navajo. Clara lived in the breath between these 2 worlds. She knew the traders who passed through, the hunters who smelled of unwashed skins and blood, and the townsfolk who looked at her solitary existence with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She finished her coffee and tossed the dregs onto the dry earth. The dust drank it greedily. There was work to be done. There was always work. By the time the sun was high enough to burn the back of her neck, Clara had fed the chickens, milked the single cow that remained, and hitched the old mare, Bess, to the buckboard wagon. The larder was empty of flour and coffee, and she needed to visit Red Mesa. She called for Noah, who came running from the barn, his hair a nest of straw. "Stay close to the house. Noah," she instructed, her voice firm but not unkind. "Check the fence near the creek. If the wire is down, don't try to pull it yourself. Just mark it. I will be back before the shadows touch the barn door." "I can come with you," Noah said, trying to square his narrow shoulders. "I can help load the sacks." "Someone needs to watch the place," Clara said, handing him a piece of dried biscuit. "You are the man of the house when I am gone. Keep the rifle loaded, but do not touch it unless a wolf comes for the calf. Do you understand?" Noah nodded, accepting the responsibility with a solemnity that made Clara's chest ache. He should have been in a schoolhouse, learning his letters, not guarding a patch of dust against the unknown. The ride into Red Mesa took 2 hours. The wagon rattled over ruts, baked hard as iron. The landscape was a vast canvas of ochre and sagebrush, beautiful in a way that could kill a person who did not respect it. As Clara guided Bess toward the main street, she felt the tension in the air before she even saw a soul. It was a tangible thing, a tightness in the way people moved, the way heads turned sharply at the sound of approaching hooves. Red Mesa was on edge. Clara tied Bess to the rail in front of the general store. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, dusting the road grit from her faded calico skirt, she saw them. 2 men stood near the entrance of the sheriff's office, commanding the space around them like predators at a watering hole. One was Silas Crow. He was a bounty hunter, a former cavalryman who wore his history in the brutal scar that divided his beard and the cold, flat look in his eyes. He was reading a piece of paper, a fresh wanted poster, with a hunger that turned Clara's stomach. Crow did not hunt for justice. He hunted for the weight of silver in his pocket. Beside him stood Ephraim Lark. Lark was the Indian agent for the territory, a man appointed to keep the peace and manage the affairs of the native tribes. He was dressed in a suit that was too fine for the dust of Red Mesa, his boots polished to a shine that seemed obscene amidst the grime. He was speaking, his voice smooth and oily. It is a matter of order. Silas, Lark was saying, gesturing with a manicured hand toward the vast western expanse. Civilization requires lines to be drawn, and those who cross them must be made examples of. Crow spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the boardwalk, missing Clara's boot by inches. He looked up, his eyes sliding over her with an indifference that was more insulting than leering. I don't care about your lines. Lark, I care about the payout. This new one, he is worth enough to keep me in whiskey for a year. He is a symbol, Lark corrected, though his eyes were not on Crow, but scanning the land beyond the town roofs, looking at it not as scenery, but as a butcher looks at a carcass to be divided. Remove the symbols, and the resistance crumbles. The land opens up. Clara hurried past them, keeping her head down. She wanted no part of their world. But as she entered the general store, the talk was the same. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, was weighing out flour with shaking hands. A group of men were gathered by the stove, their voices low and angry. They say the wagon was found at the bottom of Painted Canyon, one man hissed. Driver dead, money box gone, food supplies taken. Navajo? Another man spat. Has to be. They are getting bold. I heard it was a war party, a third added, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Coming down from the stronghold. We ought to ride out there and burn them out before they come for our women. Mr. Henderson looked up and saw Clara. Miss Whitmore, he said, trying to force a smile. Quiet day at the ranch. Quiet enough, Clara said, placing her list on the counter. Just the flour and the coffee today, Mr. Henderson, and a small bag of sugar if you have it. Bad time to be out alone. Clara, Mr. Henderson said, leaning in. You hear about the payload missing, vanished into thin air. Folks are saying it is the tribes. The sheriff is gathering a posse, but Silas Crow reckons he can find the culprits faster. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Is there proof? She asked quietly. That it was the dine. The room went silent. The men by the stove turned to look at her. Proof, one of them scoffed. What proof do you need? Girl, they are savages. They steal. That is what they do. Clara took her supplies, her heart hammering against her ribs. She paid with the few coins she had scraped together from selling eggs and the last of the wool, counting them out carefully. $1, $2, $3.50. It was a fortune to her, and now it was gone. She walked out, passing Crow and Lark again. Lark was pinning the new poster to the wall. It was a crude drawing of a Navajo warrior, the features exaggerated and menacing. $1,000, Lark said softly, catching Clara's eye. For the man who leads the raids. A lot of money for a farm girl, isn't it, Miss Whitmore? Clara gripped her flour sack tighter. I have no need for blood money, Mr. Lark. Lark smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Everyone has needs, my dear, especially those with mortgages coming due. Clara climbed into her wagon and snapped the reins, urging Bess into a trot. She wanted to be away from the hate, away from the greed that oozed from men like Lark and Crow. She drove fast, the wheels bouncing violently, until the town was just a smudge of smoke behind her. But the silence of the desert offered no comfort today. The news of the missing wagon hung heavy in the air. If the town was angry, they would strike out at anyone with dark skin. And if the tribes were being blamed for something they did not do, or if desperation had truly driven them to violence, then the war was coming to her doorstep whether she wanted it or not. She hated it. She hated the violence that seemed woven into the very fabric of this territory. She had seen what bullets did to flesh. She had seen her father die not from a glorious duel, but from a festering wound gained in a foolish dispute over water rights. She wanted peace. She wanted to wake up and hear only the birds, not the phantom echoes of gunfire. But as she looked out over the scrubland, seeing the way a hawk dived onto a field mouse, she knew the truth. The West did not give peace away for free. You had to carve it out, and sometimes you had to bleed to keep it. The sun was beginning its descent when the ranch came into view. It sat in the shadow of a low ridge, a small island of human effort in a sea of wildness. And there, standing by the seasonal creek that ran behind the house, was the cottonwood tree. It was an ancient thing, its bark deeply furrowed, its limbs twisted by 100 years of storms. The drought had turned the grass yellow and dried the creek to a trickle, but the cottonwood endured. Its roots went deep, finding water where none seemed to exist. It stood tall, its leaves turning gold in the autumn light, shimmering like coins. Clara pulled the wagon to a halt and looked at the tree. It was her anchor. When her mother died, Clara had sat beneath that tree and wept until she was dry. When the bank threatened to foreclose, she had touched its rough bark and sworn she would not move. "We are still here," she whispered to the wind. She saw Noah running from the barn to greet her, alive and safe. But as she watched him, a feeling of dread settled in her stomach, heavier than the sack of flour. The wind had shifted. It was blowing from the north now, from the deep canyons and the hidden places. It brought with it the smell of ozone and approaching thunder. Though the sky was clear, something was coming. The missing wagon, the bounty hunter. The agent with his cold eyes, they were all storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her boots hitting the dust with a solid thud. She unhitched Bess and began the evening chores, her movements efficient and practiced. She did not know that less than 10 miles away, in the dark recess of a rocky arroyo, a man was bleeding onto the stones, clutching a secret that would bring that storm right to her door. She did not know that her life, as solitary and hard as it was about to end, and a new, dangerous life was about to begin. Clara walked to the porch and looked west one last time as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red. She shivered, wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and went inside, sliding the heavy wooden bolt of the door into place. It was the illusion of safety. She knew. Wood and iron could stop a wolf, but they could not stop destiny, and destiny was riding toward her on the back of a dying horse. The wind changed direction 3 hours past midnight. It had been blowing steadily from the north, a cold and insistent draft that rattled the loose window pane in the kitchen. But then it died abruptly and swung around to the west. This new wind carried the heavy, static charge of a storm that refused to break, and with it came the sound that tore Clara Whitmore from her fitful sleep. It was a gunshot. The sound was flat and ugly, echoing off the canyon walls miles away, yet distinct enough in the silence of the high desert to sound like a crack of a whip in the yard. Clara sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She waited, holding her breath, listening to the house settle. A moment later, there was a second shot, followed by the distant, terrified whinny of a horse. Then, silence returned, heavier than before. Clara threw off her quilt. She did not light the kerosene lamp. In the darkness, light made a target. She pulled on her heavy work boots, her nightdress bunching around her knees, and grabbed the shawl from the back of the chair. She moved to the corner of the room where her father's old Winchester rifle rested against the wall. She checked the chamber by feel, the cold metal biting into her palm. In the next room, Noah shifted in his sleep but did not wake. Clara closed his door softly and stepped out onto the porch. The night was vast and indifferent. The moon was a sliver of bone low in the sky, offering little illumination. Clara strained her eyes toward the west, toward the jagged silhouette of the creek bed and the cottonwood tree. There was nothing but shadows and the shifting shapes of sagebrush. But her instincts, honed by 2 years of running the ranch alone, screamed that something was wrong. The air smelled of sulfur and disturbed earth. She moved off the porch, the rifle held across her body. The ground was cold through the soles of her boots. She did not go toward the main road. She followed the dry creek bed, moving silently through the sand. She had walked 200 yards when she heard it, a low, wet sound, a gasp that was trying to be a breath. Clara crouched low behind a cluster of mesquite. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she saw a dark shape collapsed near the roots of the giant cottonwood. It was not an animal. It was a man. And beside him, A horse stood trembling, its head hanging low, its coat slick with sweat or blood. Clara raised the rifle, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Who is there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I am armed." The figure on the ground tried to move. A hand clawed at the dirt, dragging a heavy body forward an inch, then collapsing again. Clara approached cautiously, keeping the barrel trained on the figure. As she got closer, the metallic smell of blood assaulted her senses, overriding the scent of sage. She stepped into the clearing and looked down. He was dying. Even in the dim light, she recognized the moccasins, the heavy silver concho belt, and the thick, dark hair unbound and matted with dust. He was lying on his side, his left shoulder a ruin of torn flesh and dark, soaking fabric. He looked to be in his late 20s, his face sharp-angled and strong, though now drained of color, his skin taking on the gray pallor of ash. Clara lowered the rifle slightly. This was the enemy, according to the town. This was the monster Ephraim Lark had warned about. The savage Silas Crow was hunting. But as she looked at him, she did not see a monster. She saw a man bleeding to death in her dirt. The warrior's eyes snapped open. They were black, fever-bright, and filled with a sudden, terrifying focus. He did not reach for the knife at his belt. He did not try to attack. Instead, he reached into his tunic with his good hand and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it toward her. It landed with a soft thud against her boot. Clara stared at it, then back at him. "Do not," he rasped, the words tearing out of his throat. Clara froze. He spoke English. Not the broken, pigeon trade speak she heard sometimes at the trading post, but clear, desperate English. "Do not take me to the town," he whispered, his chest heaving with the effort. "They will kill me." Clara stood paralyzed. The law of the territory was clear. If you found a hostile, you reported him to the sheriff. If you harbored him, you were a traitor. If she helped him, she risked everything: her land, her brother's safety, her own life. Silas Crow was out there somewhere, likely the one who had fired the shots. If Crow found him here, he would burn her house down around her ears. But looking at the man's face, seeing the raw will to survive burning in his eyes even as his body failed him, Clara felt the tug of something older than the law. It was the same instinct that made her water the cottonwood during the drought. You do not let living things die if you can help it. "If you die here," Clara said, her voice hard, "Silas Crow will find you anyway, and he will blame me for killing you or helping you. I cannot leave you here." She slung the rifle over her shoulder and knelt beside him. He flinched, his muscles coiling, but he was too weak to stop her. She checked the wound. It was a clean entry, but the exit was messy, and he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. "Can you stand?" she asked. He grit his teeth and nodded, though the sweat on his forehead suggested otherwise. Clara grabbed his good arm and pulled. He was heavy, solid muscle and bone, dead weight against her. He groaned, a sound of pure agony. But he found his feet. He swayed, and Clara shoved her shoulder under his good arm, taking his weight. "The barn," she said. "We have to get to the barn." It was a slow, torturous journey. Every step was a battle. Clara could feel the heat radiating from him, the fever already taking hold. He smelled of horse, of rain on dry rocks, and of blood, so much blood. They stumbled into the barn, the darkness swallowing them. Clara guided him to the ladder of the hayloft. "Up," she ordered. "They will look in the stalls. They might not look in the hay." It took every ounce of strength they both possessed to get him up the ladder. He collapsed into the loose hay, his breathing shallow and rapid. Clara quickly covered him with a horse blanket, then scrambled back down. She grabbed a shovel and ran back to the cottonwood tree. She kicked dry dirt over the bloodstains, scuffing the ground to look like the horse had merely paced there. She grabbed the horse's reins. It was a Mustang, skittish and wild-eyed, and led it deep into the brush of the canyon behind the house, hobbling it where it could graze but would not be seen from the road. By the time she returned to the barn with her medical kit, her lantern, and a bucket of water, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She forced herself to breathe. "Stop it," she told herself. "Panic kills. Work saves." She climbed into the loft and hung the lantern on a nail, keeping the flame low. The golden light washed over the warrior. He was unconscious now, or close to it. This was the moment. The reality of what she was doing settled over her. She was nursing a man the entire territory wanted dead. Clara knelt beside him. She took her sewing scissors from the kit. "I'm going to cut your shirt," she said softly, not knowing if he could hear her. "I need to see the damage." She cut the heavy fabric away, peeling it back from the wound. The bullet had torn through the deltoid muscle. It had missed the bone, she thought, or at least she hoped. But the flesh was mangled. She dipped a clean rag into the bucket of water. She had boiled the water earlier that evening for dishes, and it was still lukewarm. She touched the wet rag to the wound. The warrior hissed, his back arching off the hay, but he did not wake. Clara worked with a grim determination. She washed away the dried blood, cleaning the grit and threads of clothing from the raw meat of his shoulder. Her hands, usually so rough from farm work, found a sudden, gentle rhythm. She was efficient, her movements precise. She was a farm girl. She had birthed calves and stitched up horses that had run into barbed wire. Flesh was flesh, but this was different. As she washed his chest to clear the blood, she felt the beat of his heart under his skin. It was strong, a drumbeat of defiance. She noticed the scars on his chest, old ones, white lines against the copper skin. This was a body that had known violence long before tonight. "I have to stitch it," she murmured. "I am sorry. This will hurt." She threaded her needle with a silk thread she had been saving for a Sunday dress. She poured a generous amount of whiskey, her father's leftover bottle, over the wound and over the needle. Ronan groaned, his head trashing to the side. "Nanda! Nanda!" Clara placed a firm hand on his good shoulder, pressing him down. "Stay still, please." She drove the needle through the skin. Her own stomach turned, but she did not look away. She pulled the edges of the wound together, knotting the thread, stitch after stitch. Blood coated her fingers, sticky and warm. She wiped the sweat from her own forehead with her sleeve, leaving a streak of his blood on her skin. It took 20 minutes. When she was done, she bandaged the shoulder tightly with clean strips of linen. She lifted his head and held a cup of water to his lips. "Drink," she commanded. He swallowed reflexively, coughing, then drinking greedily. He opened his eyes for a second. In the lantern light, they were dark pools of pain, but they locked onto hers. There was no hatred in them now, just confusion. And something else, recognition. "Clara," she said. "My name is Clara." He whispered something in Dine. It sounded like a hee-hee, but his voice was fading. He slipped back into the dark waters of fever. Clara sat back on her heels, exhausted. She looked at her hands, stained with the blood of a stranger. She looked at his face, now peaceful in sleep. She felt a strange, terrifying connection to him. She had opened his flesh and sewn it back together. In a way, his life was now tied to her hands. She stayed with him until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the barn walls. He tossed and turned, muttering words she did not understand. He spoke of Hogan, of Shy and Toe. It sounded like a song, a broken, desperate song of a man calling for home. It broke Clara's heart to hear it. It made him human in a way the townspeople would never admit. When the sun fully rose, Clara went to the house. She washed the blood from her hands and face, scrubbing until her skin was raw. She changed her dress, hiding the stained one deep in the laundry basket. She put on a pot of coffee and sat on the porch, waiting. She did not have to wait long. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the sound of hoofbeats thundered up the road. 3 riders. In the lead was Silas Crow. Clara stood up, smoothing her apron. She forced her face into a mask of annoyance. The expression of a busy woman interrupted. Crow pulled his horse up right at the porch steps. The animal danced, kicking up dust. Crow looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, his temper clearly frayed. 2 other men, rough-looking deputies from the town, flanked him. "Miss Whitmore," Crow rumbled, his voice like gravel in a grinder. He did not tip his hat. "Mr. Crow," Clara said coldly, "you are frightening my chickens. Is there a reason you are riding on my land this early?" Crow leaned over his saddle horn. "We are tracking a runner, a Navajo buck. Shot him last night near the canyon ridge, about 3 miles west of here. He is bleeding like a stuck pig. You see anyone?" Clara looked him dead in the eye. This was the first time she had ever lied to a man of the law, or at least a man who claimed to represent it. Her heart was beating so hard she thought he must see it pulsing in her neck. "I heard shots in the night," Clara said. "Woke me up. I thought it was coyotes." "Did you see anyone?" Crow repeated, his eyes narrowing. He scanned the yard, looking at the barn, the well, the clothesline. "I saw nothing but shadows." Clara lied. "And I have been up since dawn doing chores. If a bleeding man had come through my yard, Mr. Crow, I think I would have noticed the blood. Or my dog would have barked." She didn't have a dog, but Crow didn't know that. Crow pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. It was the wanted poster she had seen in town, but now it was crumpled and stained. "He is dangerous. Miss Whitmore, he is a killer. If you are hiding him, I live here alone with a 12-year-old boy. Mr. Crow." Clara cut him off, her voice sharpening with genuine anger at the implication. "Do you think I would invite a savage killer into my home if I saw him? I would have shot him myself." The lie tasted like bile. But it worked. Crow stared at her for a long moment, searching for a crack in her armor. Clara held his gaze, channeling all the stubbornness of the cottonwood tree. "Finally." Crow grunted. He stuffed the paper back into his pocket. "Check your barn. Check your outbuildings. If he is wounded, he will seek shelter. If you find him, don't play hero. Send the boy to town. I will keep my rifle close," Clara said. Crow signaled to his men. "Let's ride. The trail went toward the dry wash. He probably crawled in a hole to die." They wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust that choked the morning air. Clara stood on the porch until they were just specks on the horizon. Her knees felt like water. She grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. She had done it. She had chosen a side. She turned and went back inside the house. On the kitchen table sat the leather pouch the warrior Ronan had thrown to her. She had almost forgotten it in the chaos. Clara sat down and pulled the pouch toward her. It was made of soft deerskin, darkened with age and use. She opened the drawstring. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the weather, was a small, black notebook and a single sheet of folded paper. She unfolded the paper first. It was a bill of lading, a standard government form used for supply wagons, but at the bottom, there was a stamp in red wax, a seal she recognized. It was the official seal of the Department of the Interior, the bureau that managed Indian affairs. But scrawled across it in messy handwriting were numbers and dates that didn't make sense for a simple supply run. She opened the notebook. It was a ledger. Columns of figures, dates, names. She saw Ephraim Lark's name written multiple times. Next to his name were sums of money, large sums, $500, $2,000. And next to those sums were notes land deed, Whitmore sector, water rights, canyon, removal fee. Clara's breath hitched. She traced the words, Whitmore sector. That was her land. This was her ranch. This wasn't just a robbery. The wagon that had gone missing, the one the Navajo were blamed for attacking, it wasn't carrying supplies for the reservation. It was carrying payoffs. It was a record of corruption so deep it could hang every official in Red Mesa. Ronan Bigay hadn't robbed a wagon. He had stolen the evidence of a crime that was slowly strangling the territory. Clara looked out the window toward the barn. The man lying in her hayloft wasn't just a wounded warrior. He was the only witness to a conspiracy that involved the Indian agent, the bounty hunter, and likely half the town council. And he had brought the proof right to her kitchen table. She realized then that her life as a simple farm girl was over. The war wasn't coming. It was already here, sitting on her table, and she was holding the weapon that could end it, or get them all killed. Clara closed the notebook and hid it inside the flour jar on the shelf. Then she filled a fresh bowl with water and headed back to the barn. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but it was joined by a new feeling, a fierce, burning anger. They wanted her land. They wanted to kill this man to hide their theft. "Not today," Clara whispered to the wind. "Not on my watch." She walked across the yard, her head high, the morning sun casting a long shadow behind her that stretched all the way to the barn door. The fever broke on the third day, snapping like a dry twig under a heavy boot. Clara was sitting on an overturned crate in the hayloft, mending a tear in one of Noah's shirts, when the rhythm of breathing in the corner changed. For 2 days, Ronan had been a furnace of heat and delirious muttering, his body fighting the infection with a violence that frightened her. But now, the ragged gasping smoothed out into a quiet, steady inhale. Clara lowered the needle. She watched him, the morning light, filtering through the gaps in the barn siding, laid stripes of gold across his face. He was still pale, the copper of his skin washed out to the color of dry clay, but the tension had left his jaw. Suddenly, his eyes opened. There was no transition between sleep and wakefulness. One moment, he was still. The next, he was coiling, his good arm pushing against the floorboards, his legs scrambling for purchase. It was the waking of a prey animal, or a man who had spent his life sleeping with a knife in his hand. He gasped as the movement pulled at his stitched shoulder, a sharp hiss of pain escaping his teeth. He slumped back against the hay bale, his chest heaving, his dark eyes darting around the loft until they landed on Clara. She did not move. She stayed seated on the crate, her hands resting calmly in her lap. On the small wooden table between them lay her father's skinning knife. She had not placed it there to threaten him, but to draw a line. A boundary. "You are safe," Clara said, her voice even and low, the way she spoke to a spooked colt. "You are in the barn of the Whitmore Ranch. I stitched your shoulder. You have been asleep for 2 days." Ronan stared at her, his gaze clearing. He looked at the rafters, then at the bandage on his shoulder, and finally back at the knife on the table. He did not reach for it. He looked at Clara with a scrutiny that made her conscious of the loose strands of hair falling about her face and the dust on her apron. "Why?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping on stone. "Because I do not let things die on my land if I can help it," Clara answered simply. She leaned forward, her eyes hardening. "But my charity has limits. You are alive, and you are hidden. But now you must tell me why Silas Crow and the Indian agent are tearing apart the county looking for you." Ronan shifted, wincing. "They came here. Crow was in my yard the morning I found you." Clara said, "I lied to him. I have never lied to the law before. So you will tell me the truth. Are you the bandit they say you are? Did you raid that wagon?" Ronan let out a bitter, dry laugh that turned into a cough. He accepted the tin cup of water she offered, drinking it slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I am no bandit," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "And that wagon, it was not raided by the Then who?" "Men who look like you," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "I was tracking a stray from my uncle's herd. I was up on the ridge above Painted Canyon. I saw the wagon stop. It was not an ambush. The driver stopped. He waited." Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Waited for what?" "For the men in the dusters," Ronan continued. "They rode out from the rocks. They did not shoot the driver. They spoke to him. They took the strongbox. They took the crates. Then they shot the horses, and they shot the driver." Clara's hands tightened on her knees. "Murder." "Then they changed," Ronan said, his expression darkening with disgust. "They put on moccasins. They scattered arrows, Apache arrows, Navajo arrows. It did not matter to them. They made it look like a massacre. I tried to slip away, to bring word to the agent, thinking he would want to know." He looked at Clara, his eyes burning. "But when I got close to the edge of the canyon, I saw the man leading them. It was the one with the scar, the one who hunts men for money." "Crow," Clara breathed. "He saw me," Ronan said. "He fired. I took the bullet in the shoulder. I rode until my horse could not carry me, And then I crawled until I found your water." Clara looked at the flour sack in the corner of the loft, where she had hidden the ledger. The pieces fell into place with the heavy finality of a prison door slamming shut. The ledger proved the money was being siphoned. Ronan was the witness to the violence that covered the theft. "They are doing this to take the land," Clara said, the realization tasting like ash in her mouth. "Lark wants the valley. He blames the raids on your people so the army will come and clear you out. And Crow does the dirty work." Ronan nodded slowly. "And now you know. And because you know, you are in as much danger as I am." The silence that stretched between them was heavy with unsaid things. Clara stood up and walked to the loft door, looking out through the cracks at the yard below. Noah was down there, chopping wood. The axe fell with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. If she turned Ronan in, she would be a hero to the town. Her debts might be forgiven. She would be safe, but she would be a part of the rot that was eating the territory from the inside out. She would be just another person destroying the truth for comfort. "You stay here," Clara said, turning back to him. Her voice trembled slightly, but her chin was high. "You heal. When you are strong enough to ride, we will figure out how to get you out." Ronan looked at her, and for the first time, the guard in his eyes dropped completely. He looked at her not as a white woman, not as an enemy, but as a creature of equal will. "You take a great risk." "Clara Whitmore. My father used to say that nothing worth keeping comes without a fight," she replied. She picked up the empty water cup. "Rest. I will bring broth later." The days that followed fell into a tense, quiet routine to the outside world. Clara was the same hard-working woman she'd always been. She mended fences. She haggled with the peddler who came by with dry goods. She cooked meals for her brother. But inside the barn, a secret world existed. It was an intimacy born of necessity. Clara had to change his bandages twice a day to prevent infection. The first few times, her hands shook as she touched his skin, acutely aware of the hardness of his muscles and the heat of his body. She was a woman of 24 who had known little of men, save for the awkward courting of a few local farmhands, which she had politely declined. Ronan was different. He was quiet, but his silence was not empty. It was observant. He watched her as she worked, his dark eyes following the movements of her hands as she wrung out a cloth or applied a salve made of comfrey and lard. "You have strong hands," he said one evening as she tied the linen strip around his shoulder. Clara flushed, keeping her eyes on the knot. "They are working hands. They are not made for embroidery." "Hands that can heal are better than hands that can only make pretty things," Ronan said softly. He was healing with a speed that surprised her. By the 5th day, he was sitting up, sharpening a small piece of wood with a borrowed knife. He began to teach her, in whispers, about the world she thought she knew. He pointed through the cracks in the wall. "You watch the road," he said. "That is wrong. The road tells you who is coming to be seen. You must watch the birds." "Look." Clara squinted. "I see only scrub jays." "See how they fly low near the creek bed," Ronan explained. "They are agitated. Something is moving in the brush that is not a coyote. A coyote moves with the wind. A man moves against it if he is hunting." He taught her to listen to the wind, to separate the natural sounds of the desert from the intrusion of iron and leather. He taught her that the desert was not empty, but full of signs for those who knew how to read them. And as he spoke, Clara found herself drawn not just to his knowledge, but to the man himself. There was a dignity in him, a profound connection to the earth that made the frantic greed of men like Lark seem small and pathetic. She found herself lingering in the loft longer than necessary. She brought him extra portions of stew. She asked him about his people, about the songs he had muttered in his fever. He told her about the high mesas, the sheep herds, the weaving of rugs that told stories of the stars. It was a dangerous thing, this softening of her heart. Every time she looked at his mouth, or the way his hair fell over his forehead, she felt a pang of guilt. He was a fugitive. She was a white rancher. The world would hang them both for simply sitting this close together. But in the dim light of the barn, The world felt very far away. The bubble of their secret burst on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was in the vegetable garden, pulling up the last of the withered carrots, when she saw Noah walking toward the barn with the determined stride of a boy on a mission. He was carrying his own small hunting knife. "Noah!" Clara called out, dropping her basket. "Wait!" But Noah had already slipped through the barn door. Clara ran. Her heart was in her throat. If Noah panicked, if he ran to town, if he screamed. She burst into the barn, the bright sunlight blinding her for a second after the run. She scrambled up the ladder, breathless. "Noah, don't!" She stopped. Noah was standing in the middle of the loft, staring at Ronan. Ronan was sitting up, his back against a post, his face calm. He had not reached for a weapon. He was simply looking at the boy. Noah looked at the bandaged shoulder, then at the dark features of the warrior. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide. He held his small knife, but his hand was trembling. "You are him," Noah whispered. "The one on the poster. The killer." "I am the one on the poster," Ronan said, his voice steady. "But I have killed no one who did not try to kill me first, and I did not rob that wagon." Noah looked at Clara, who had stepped between them. "Clara, you knew. Put the knife away." "Noah," Clara said, her voice firm. She reached out and gently lowered her brother's arm. "He is hurt. I am helping him. But Mr. Crow said—" "Mr. Crow is a liar," Clara said, crouching down to look her brother in the eye. "Mr. Crow and Mr. Lark are the ones doing bad things. Noah, this man, Ronan, he saw the truth. That is why they want to hurt him." Noah looked back at Ronan. The boy was 12, an age where the world is black and white, heroes and villains. He looked at the man who was supposed to be a savage, and he saw only a wounded human being who was looking at him with respect, not malice. Is he going to hurt us?" Noah asked. Ronan spoke then. "I would sooner cut off my own hand than harm the brother of the woman who saved my life." The solemnity of the vow hung in the air. Noah swallowed hard. He looked at the bandage again. "Does it hurt?" "Like a kick from a mule," Ronan admitted, a faint smile touching his lips. Noah let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a minute. He sheathed his knife. I can watch the road," he said, looking at Clara. "From the roof of the chicken coop. You can see further from there." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled Noah into a hug, burying her face in his dusty hair. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are a brave man. Noah Whitmore." With Noah's help, the burden became lighter. He took his duty seriously, sitting for hours on the coop roof, whittling and watching. He became a conspirator, bringing Ronan apples and asking endless questions about tracking and hunting, which Ronan answered with patient seriousness. But the reprieve was short-lived. 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised, sickly yellow. The wind died completely, leaving a vacuum of silence that was more terrifying than the howl. "Sandstorm," Ronan said, sniffing the air. "A big one." Clara rushed to secure the ranch. She and Noah boarded up the windows of the house. They drove the few livestock into the lower stalls of the barn. By the time Clara ran back to the loft to check on Ronan, the wall of dust was already consuming the horizon, a towering, boiling monster of red earth that reached the heavens. "Stay here," Clara told Noah, pointing to the storm cellar near the house. "Go underground. I have to make sure the barn doors hold." She made it to the barn just as the storm hit. It slammed into the structure with the force of a physical blow. The daylight was extinguished instantly, replaced by a suffocating, swirling twilight of red dust that found every crack and crevice. Clara climbed the ladder, coughing. "Ronan!" He was there, pressing a blanket against the gaps in the north wall. "Here!" The wind shrieked like a banshee, tearing at the roof shingles. The barn groaned, the timbers complaining under the assault. The dust was everywhere, coating their skin, filling their mouths with the taste of copper and ancient earth. "We need to get to the corner," Ronan yelled over the roar. "The structure is strongest there." They huddled in the corner of the loft, behind the stack of hay bales. Clara pulled a heavy wool blanket over their heads to filter the air. In the dark, dusty cocoon of the blanket, the world shrank down to just the two of them. They sat side by side, their backs against the rough wood, knees touching. The heat was stifling. Clara could feel the warmth of Ronan's arm against hers. She could hear his breathing, ragged but controlled. Suddenly, through the howling of the wind, they heard a sound that made Clara's blood freeze. Voices, shouting. Then, the heavy thud of hooves against the earth. Close, right outside the barn walls. "Riders," Ronan whispered, his lips inches from her ear. His hand found hers in the darkness and gripped it hard. His palm was calloused and warm. Clara stopped breathing. The riders must have been caught in the storm and were seeking shelter in the lee of the barn. "Open the damn door," a voice roared. It sounded like one of Crow's deputies. "It is barred from the inside," another voice yelled back. "Just keep the horses against the wall. It will pass." Clara and Ronan sat frozen, pressed together. Every muscle in Ronan's body was coiled tight as a spring. His hand squeezed hers, not in fear, but in a silent command for stillness. The proximity was overwhelming. In the terrifying dark, with the smell of dust and danger surrounding them, Clara became intensely aware of him as a man. The scent of him, sage, sweat, and leather filled her senses. She could feel the steady beat of his heart where his shoulder pressed against hers. It was a raw, electric connection. They were two people hunted by the same storm, both natural and human. She turned her head slightly. In the gloom, she could just make out the outline of his profile. He was looking at the wall, listening to the men outside who wanted to kill him. He did not let go of her hand. For an hour, the storm raged. For an hour, the men outside cursed and spat and huddled against the wood. And for an hour, Clara and Ronan sat in the intimate silence of the blanket, their fingers interlaced. A silent pact of survival forged in the dark. When the wind finally began to die down, the voices outside grumbled. "Let's move," the deputy yelled. "Crow wants us at the canyon before dark. He thinks the buck might double back." The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Clara let out a long, shuddering breath. She realized she was still holding Ronan's hand. She pulled it away slowly, missing the warmth immediately. They threw off the blanket. The air in the loft was thick with suspended dust, shafts of light cutting through it like solid bars. Ronan looked at her. His face was streaked with red dust, making his eyes look even brighter. "They are close," he said quietly. "Too close." Clara nodded. She brushed the grit from her dress, her mind racing. The storm had bought them time, but it had also brought the enemy to their doorstep. Crow wasn't just searching random canyons anymore. He was tightening the noose. "We cannot stay here," Clara said, her voice finding a new, steel-like resolve. "If they come back, they will search the loft. They will find the ledger. They will find you." "I must go," Ronan said. "I will take my chances in the rocks." "No," Clara said sharply. She turned to face him. "If you go into the rocks, they will hunt you down like a dog, and the truth about the robbery goes with you." She walked to the window and looked out at the retreating storm clouds. The land was scrubbed clean, raw and red. "We don't hide anymore," Clara said. "If we want to live, we have to stop running. We have to make them answer for what they did." She turned back to Ronan. "Can you ride?" Ronan tested his shoulder. He winced, but nodded. "I can ride." "Good," Clara said. "Because we are going to finish this." She climbed down the ladder, her boots hitting the rungs with purpose. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. She was a Whitmore. She was a daughter of the West, and she was done hiding in her own barn. The plan was born of desperation and the stubborn refusal to die that defined the frontier. They would not run for the border, nor would they hide in the deep caves of the Navajo stronghold. They would ride straight into the heart of the danger. They would take the ledger to Sheriff Amos Dwyer. Dwyer was an old man, a relic of the days when the law was just a badge and a prayer. He drank too much whiskey and moved slowly, but he hated Silas Crow. Crow represented everything Dwyer despised the mercenary. Blood-bought justice that had no honor. If anyone in Red Mesa would look at the seal on the ledger and see the truth rather than a payout, it was Amos Dwyer. They left the barn under the cover of a moonless sky. Clara rode Bess, her sturdy mare, while Ronan mounted the Mustang. He was still pale, his left arm bound tight against his chest in a sling Clara had fashioned from a flour sack. But he sat the horse with the natural grace of a man who had been riding before he could walk. "Stay off the main road," Ronan instructed. His voice low. The wind carries sound in the valley. "We ride the ridge line." They moved in silence for 2 hours. The only sound the clatter of hooves on stone and the breathing of the horses. The landscape was a shadowed labyrinth of mesquite and jagged rock. Clara gripped the reins, her father's Winchester rifle resting across her saddle horn. She felt exposed, a target painted on the vast canvas of the night. They reached the narrows of Chimney Rock, a pass where the trail squeezed between 2 towering pillars of sandstone. It was a natural choke point. Ronan pulled his horse up sharply. "Wait." He tilted his head, listening to the darkness. Clara watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard nothing but the wind sighing through the crevices. "What is it?" she whispered. "Iron," Ronan said. "Someone cocked a hammer?" Before Clara could process the words, the night erupted. A muzzle flash bloomed from the rocks above them, bright and sudden as lightning. A bullet whined past Clara's ear, slapping into the dirt behind her. "Ride!" Ronan shouted. He spurred the Mustang, not away from the danger, but forward, putting himself between Clara and the shooter. Another shot rang out, chipping the stone near Bess's hooves. The mare reared, screaming in panic. Clara fought the reins, forcing the horse down. She saw a shape move on the ridge, a man in a long duster, silhouette against the stars. "Get to the cut!" Ronan yelled, pointing to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. A third shot fired, and Ronan jerked in his saddle. He didn't fall, but he slumped forward. Clara did not think. She did not weigh the moral weight of her soul. She raised the Winchester, sighted on the flash of the muzzle, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The gun roared, a thunderous rebuke to the silence. She didn't aim to kill. She aimed at the rock face right beside the gunman. The stone exploded in a shower of sparks and shards. The man on the ridge yelled in surprise and ducked back. "Go!" Clara screamed, kicking Bess into a gallop. They tore through the brush, the horses scrambling over loose shale, until they reached the fissure. It was a narrow, winding path that cut deep into the earth, too tight for a clean shot from above. They rode until the horses were blown, their flanks heaving with sweat and foam. They stopped in a small box canyon, hidden by overhanging willow branches. Clara practically fell off her horse and ran to Ronan. "You were hit," she said, her hands reaching for him. "Grazed," Ronan gritted out, sliding down from the Mustang. He leaned heavily against the stone wall. "My leg." "It is nothing." Clara checked. A bullet had torn a furrow through the leather of his chaps and the flesh of his thigh. But it was shallow. The real damage was the exhaustion. His face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead. "We cannot go to the sheriff tonight," Clara said, her voice shaking as the adrenaline crashed. "They are watching the roads. They knew we were coming." "They did not know," Ronan said. His breathing labored. "They are just casting a wide net. That was a patrol." Clara helped him sit on a flat rock. She took the water canteen and handed it to him. Then she pulled the leather pouch from her saddlebag. The ledger. She needed to understand why they were being hunted with such ferocity. It had to be more than just a stolen payroll. She opened the book, squinting in the dim light of the false dawn that was beginning to bleed into the sky. She turned past the pages of supply numbers she had seen before. She looked at the back of the book. There was a list of names. Henderson, $300. Mayor O'Malley, $1,000. Sheriff Dwyer, $50 monthly. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Dwyer is on the list," she whispered. He is taking money from Lark. Ronan looked up, his eyes dark. There is no one to trust. Clara turned the page. There was a map, hand-drawn, detailing the valley. Red lines crisscrossed the land. One thick red line went straight through the center of the Whitmore Ranch. Underneath, in Lark's handwriting, it read, Whitmore Sector. Key aquifer access. Owner uncooperative. Foreclosure or removal recommended. It is the water, Clara said, her voice trembling with rage. This isn't about Indian raids. It isn't about keeping the peace. It is about the water rights. My land sits on the only year-round aquifer in the basin. Lark wants to build a dam. He wants to control the water for the whole territory. She looked at Ronan. You were just the excuse. He blamed the raids on your people to scare the settlers into selling cheap. And now he wants my land to complete his empire. And I am the loose thread that can unravel his tapestry. Ronan said. Clara closed the book with a snap. No, we are the loose thread. This is my fight now too. Ronan, he wants my home. They needed help. If the sheriff was bought, they needed someone who lived outside the law, or someone the law had failed. Mateo Reyes, Clara said suddenly. The vaquero who runs the mail line through the back country. He hates Lark. Lark tried to confiscate his horses last year for government use. Can he be trusted? He is a man of his word, Clara said, and he owes my father a debt. They found Mateo 3 hours later at a watering hole near the old Spanish mission ruins. Mateo was a man of leather and sun, his face a roadmap of the desert. He listened to Clara's story without blinking, his dark eyes shifting to Ronan with a measure of respect. Lark is a snake, Mateo said, spitting on the ground, and Crow is the venom. If you go to Red Mesa now, they will hang you before you can open your mouth. We need to get word to the federal marshal in Santa Fe, Clara said, but the telegraph lines in town are watched. I can ride to Las Vegas, Mateo said, referring to the town to the north. There is a telegraph office there. I can send a message to the territorial governor, but it will take 2 days. We do not have 2 days, Ronan said. Crow is closing in. I will buy you time, Mateo promised. I will cut a trail east, make it look like you are heading for the Texas border. Crow will follow the dust. You go to ground. Clara reached out and gripped Mateo's hand. Thank you, Mateo. Vaya con Dios. Clara, Mateo said. He tipped his hat to Ronan. Warrior. They needed one more thing. Medicine. Ronan's leg needed cleaning, and his shoulder was inflamed. They dared not go to the general store, but there was a back door to the apothecary. Mrs. Hattie was a widow who brewed willow bark tea and set broken bones when the actual doctor was too drunk to work. She opened her back door at Clara's knock, a shotgun in her hand. When she saw Clara's desperate face, she lowered the weapon. Child, Hattie hissed, pulling them inside the aromatic gloom of her storeroom. The whole town is buzzing. They say you were kidnapped. I am fighting, Hattie, Clara said. I need laudanum, iodine, and clean bandages. Hattie looked at Ronan, who stood in the shadows. She didn't flinch. Crow came here yesterday, demanded protection money, said if I didn't pay, accidents happen. She shoved a bundle of supplies into Clara's arms. Make him pay. Clara, make that scarred devil pay. They rode out of town before the sun fully crested the mountains, heading for an abandoned shepherd's shack in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Range. It was a ruin of stone and timber, forgotten by the world, hidden in a grove of aspen. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dry pine needles. They secured the horses and barricaded the door. Clara lit a small tallow candle. Sit, she ordered Ronan. I need to look at that leg. Ronan sat on the dirt floor, leaning back against the wall. Clara knelt between his legs, her skirts pooling around her in the dust. The intimacy of the space was sudden and overwhelming. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the stone. She cut away the pant leg. The wound was angry and red. She cleaned it with the iodine Hattie had given them. Ronan hissed, his hand gripping his thigh, his knuckles white. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. It is a good pain, Ronan murmured. It means I am still alive. Clara worked silently, binding the wound. When she finished, she looked up. Ronan was watching her. His eyes were heavy with fatigue, but burning with an intensity that stopped her breath. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before his fingers lightly brushed her wrist. His skin was hot, feverish, but alive. "Why do you do this?" he asked softly. "You could have walked away. You could have given me the horse and gone back to your brother." "I told you," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is my fight." "It is more than that," Ronan said. He leaned forward. His breath ghosted across her cheek, warm and smelling of rain. "You are not like the others. Clara, you have a spirit that does not bend." Clara looked at his mouth. She saw the softness there, hidden beneath the warrior's grimace. She felt a pull so strong it frightened her, a desire to lean in, to close the inches between them, to find comfort in the only other person who understood the storm they were in. "Ronan," she breathed. "Clara," he whispered. He leaned closer. Their foreheads touched. For a moment, the world stopped. There was no crow, no lark, no danger. Just the heat of him, the solid, undeniable reality of a man and a woman finding each other in the dark. But then Ronan pulled back, just an inch. He looked deep into her eyes, a look of profound respect and restraint. "If I kiss you now," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I take something from you that I cannot promise to return. I am a hunted man. I have nothing to offer you but a horse and a gun." Clara reached up and touched his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "You offer me the truth. Ronan, that is more than any man in Red Mesa has ever offered." They stayed like that for a long moment, on the edge of a precipice, staring down into a future that might never happen. Then, slowly, Clara pulled back. They had dignity. They had a mission, and they would not steal this moment. They would earn it. "Sleep," Clara said softly. "I will take the first watch." But sleep did not come easily. In the quiet of the shack, the reality of their situation set in. "What happens when this is over?" Clara asked into the darkness. "If we win, if Lark is arrested." Ronan was silent for a long time. "I go back to my people," he said finally. "They will say I brought trouble. They will say a white woman is a storm that will wash away our traditions." "And I?" Clara asked, feeling a cold ache in her chest. "Am I just a storm to you?" "You are the rain after the drought," Ronan said. "But rain does not stay. It soaks into the earth and is gone." "I am not rain," Clara said fiercely. "I am the cottonwood tree. I stay, I endure." Ronan looked at her in the dim light. "Then we must make a world where the cottonwood and the desert can exist together without burning." The morning brought a decision. They could not wait for Mateo's message to reach Santa Fe. Crow would find them before then. And hiding in the shack felt like waiting to die. "We go back," Clara said, checking the load in the Winchester. "We go to Red Mesa. We take the ledger to the town square. We read it out loud. We make them hear it." "It is suicide," Ronan said, though he was already checking his own pistol. "It is justice," Clara corrected. "Crow relies on fear. Lark relies on shadows. We drag them into the sunlight." They prepared to ride. The plan was madness, but it was the only card they had left to play. They would ride in at high noon, straight down the main street. They would force a confrontation before Crow could ambush them in the dark. But as they mounted their horses, a rider appeared on the ridge. It was not Crow. It was Mateo, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He slid down the scree slope, nearly tumbling. "Clara," he shouted. "Stop!" Clara wheeled Bess around. "Mateo, did you send the message?" "No time," Mateo gasped, his face pale beneath his tan. "I doubled back. I saw them. Crow. He is not looking for you in the canyons anymore." "Where is he?" Ronan demanded. Mateo looked at Clara, his eyes full of sorrow. "He went to your ranch. Clara, he took the boy." The world tilted on its axis. Clara's grip on the reins tightened until her knuckles cracked. "Noah. He has him in the town square." Mateo said. "He sent a runner to spread the word. He says he will hang the boy at sunset for aiding a fugitive, unless you surrender." A cold, white silence washed over Clara. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. All that was left was a diamond-hard clarity. She looked at Ronan. He did not speak. He simply nodded. He knew what this meant. They were walking into a trap. They were walking to their deaths. "He wants a monster," Clara said, her voice deadly calm. "I will show him what a Whitmore does when you touch her family." She kicked Bess into a gallop. Not away from the danger, but toward it. Toward Red Mesa. Toward the man who had dared to touch her brother. The rising action had ended. The storm had broken. The sun was beginning its long, bloody descent toward the western horizon when Clara and Ronan rode into Red Mesa. The town, usually sleepy in the heat of the late afternoon, was buzzing with a frantic, ugly energy. The main street was choked with people. Men stood on the boardwalks, rifles cradled in their arms. Women peeked from behind drawn curtains. The air smelled of sweat, cheap whiskey, and the copper tang of impending violence. They did not sneak in. They did not hug the shadows. They rode straight down the center of the street, side by side. Clara sat tall on Bess, her face scrubbed of emotion. Though her heart was beating so hard it felt like a trapped bird in her chest. Ronan rode the Mustang, his injured legs stiff, his left arm still in the sling, but his head high. He looked neither left nor right. He looked only ahead, toward the town square where the crowd was thickest. A hush fell over the street as they passed. It was the silence of a held breath. The savage and the traitor had come to them. In the center of the square, near the horse trough and the hanging tree, Silas Crow had built his stage. It was a crude theater of intimidation. He stood on the back of a buckboard wagon, looming over the crowd like a dark prophet. Beside him, tied to the wagon wheel, sat Noah. The boy looked small. His face was bruised, a purple welt rising on his cheekbone, and his clothes were torn. But when he saw Clara, he did not cry out. He straightened his back against the wood of the wheel. He was a Whitmore. Ephraim Lark stood nearby, looking immaculate and out of place in his fine suit, checking his pocket watch as if bored by the delay. Crow saw them coming. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He jumped down from the wagon, his spurs jingling in the silence. "Well now," Crow boomed, his voice carrying to the edges of the square. "Look who decided to join the party. I told you, folks. I told you the girl was keeping him as a pet, and here she is, parading him through town." The crowd murmured. Angry shouts rose from the back. "Traitor! Indian lover!" Clara pulled Bess to a halt 10 yards from the wagon. She looked at Noah, checking him for broken bones with a desperate visual sweep. Then she turned her gaze to Crow. "Let the boy go. Crow!" Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. "He has done nothing. He aided a fugitive." Crow spat. "That makes him an accomplice to robbery and murder. The law is clear. Miss Whitmore, and since we don't have a judge handy, the town will decide the sentence." He gestured to the crowd, whipping them up. "This man," he pointed a thick finger at Ronan, "is the leader of the raiding party that killed 3 good men in Painted Canyon. He is the one stealing your livestock. He is the one burning your outlying barns. And we are going to hang him." A roar of approval went up. A rock flew from the crowd, striking the flank of Ronan's Mustang. The horse danced, but Ronan controlled it with his knees. Ronan dismounted. He moved stiffly, pain etching lines around his eyes, but he did not falter. He handed his reins to Clara. "No," Clara whispered, panic flaring in her eyes. "Trust," Ronan said softly. He turned and walked toward Crow. He was unarmed. His gun belt hung from his saddle horn. He walked with a quiet dignity that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the square. The crowd quieted, confused. They expected a screaming savage, a man fighting like a beast. They got a warrior walking to his death with his head up. Ronan stopped 5 paces from Crow. "I am here," Ronan said. His English was accented but clear. "I am the man you want. Release the boy." Crow laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You are in no position to bargain, boy. I have you. I have the girl. I have the brat. I think I will hang all three of you and save the county the feed bill. You will not, Ronan said. He looked past Crow, addressing the crowd. He looked at the faces of the men who wanted to kill him, the blacksmith, the baker, the ranch hands. I did not rob your wagon. I did not kill your driver. I am here to trade my life for the child's. That is the law of my people. A life for a life. Let the boy go, and I will stand for your judgment. The crowd wavered. It was a simple, brutal act of honor that they understood. These were hard people, but they respected courage. To see a hostile offer himself to save a white child, it didn't fit the story Crow had been telling them. He is trying to trick you. Lark stepped forward, sensing the shift in the mood. It is a savage trick. He wants you to lower your guard so his war party can attack. There is no war party. Clara's voice rang out. She dismounted, clutching the leather pouch and the ledger to her chest. She walked to stand beside Ronan. She was trembling, every instinct screaming at her to run, to grab Noah and flee, but she planted her feet in the dust. She was the cottonwood tree. There is no war party, Clara repeated, louder this time. There is only a lie that is costing you your money and your souls. She held up the ledger. This is the book from the missing wagon. The wagon Ronan is supposed to have robbed. Crow's hand dropped to his gun. That is evidence. Girl, hand it over. It is evidence. All right, Clara said, turning to face the townspeople. But not of robbery. It is a ledger of payoffs. She opened the book. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be steady. Mr. Henderson, she shouted, looking at the shopkeeper in the front row. You wondered why your supply shipments are always delayed, why the prices go up. It is in here. Ephraim Lark pays the freighters to hold your goods back, so you have to buy from his private stock. Henderson blinked, his mouth falling open. What? Mayor O'Malley Clara turned to the mayor, who was sweating profusely in his collar. $1,000. That is what Lark paid you to rezone the water rights in the valley. $1,000 to sell out your own town. That is a lie, the mayor squeaked. It is in his handwriting, Clara screamed, the anger finally breaking through. And the seal of the Interior Department is on the bill of lading. She turned to the crowd, flipping pages. He is not hunting Ronan because of a robbery. He is hunting him because Ronan saw Crow's men rob the wagon themselves. They killed the driver. They dressed as Indians to scare you, to make you afraid so you would sell your land cheap, so Lark could build his dam and own every drop of water in this basin. The silence in the square was absolute. It was the silence of a dam breaking. Crow looked at Lark. Lark's face had gone the color of old parchment. She is lying, Lark hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. She is hysterical. She is sleeping with the buck. She will say anything to save him. Am I lying about the water? Clara challenged. Look at your wells. Look at the creek. Why is the water drying up? Because Lark has already diverted the headwaters in the high canyon. My ranch is the last one with access. That is why they want me gone. That is why they want Ronan dead. A man in the crowd, an old rancher with a face like tanned leather, stepped forward. Let us see the book. Clara! Don't you take a step, Crow roared. He drew his pistol, leveling it at Clara. The violence of the action shocked the crowd. A lawman, even a hired one, didn't draw on a woman in the town square. Put the gun down. Silas. A voice came from the edge of the square. It was Sheriff Amos Dwyer. The old man walked out of his office, his shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He looked tired, and he looked ashamed. But he was walking. Sheriff, Crow warned. Back off. This is federal business. It looks like local murder to me, Dwyer said. He stopped 10 feet away. Clara said my name is in that book too. Is it girl? Clara looked at the sheriff. She saw the regret in his eyes. $50 a month. Sheriff. To look the other way. Dwyer nodded slowly. He spat into the dust. Well, at least he spelled my name right. He looked at Crow. I am done looking away. Silas, put the gun down. You are all fools, Lark shrieked, his composure shattering. I am the law here. I am the government. You cannot touch me. Government or not, the old rancher growled, his hand resting on his own pistol. We don't take kindly to horse thieves and land grabbers. The crowd was shifting. The mob mentality that Crow had carefully cultivated was turning against him. He was a predator surrounded by a herd that had suddenly remembered it had horns. Then, a shout came from the north road. A horse galloped into the square, lathered and blowing. It was Mateo Reyes. It is done, Mateo yelled, pulling his horse up so hard it slid on its haunches. He waved a piece of yellow paper. The wire is sent. I rode to Las Vegas myself. The federal marshal in Santa Fe has the message. A calm mission is already on the way. They know about the wagon. They know about the ledger. It was the final nail. The technology of the telegraph, the invisible wire that connected this dusty town to the power of Washington, had outpaced the lie. Lark could not bury the truth in a shallow grave anymore. Lark turned to run, scrambling toward the alley. Get him! Someone shouted. Two men tackled the Indian agent into the dust. Crow stood alone. He looked at the angry faces closing in. He looked at Clara, who held the book like a shield. And he looked at Ronan. Panic, cold and sharp, took hold of him. He wasn't going to hang. He wasn't going to jail. I will kill you all, Crow screamed. He swung the pistol, not at Clara, but at Ronan. He fired. The shot cracked through the square. Ronan moved. Despite the injured leg, despite the bad shoulder, he moved with the explosive speed of a striking snake. He didn't dive away. He dove in. The bullet tore through the fabric of Ronan's tunic, missing his ribs by a fraction of an inch. Ronan slammed into Crow, his good shoulder hitting the bounty hunter's chest with the force of a battering ram. They went down in a tangle of limbs. It was not a graceful fight. It was a desperate, ugly struggle in the dirt. Crow was bigger, heavier, and desperate. He clubbed Ronan in the face with the barrel of his gun. Blood sprayed from Ronan's lip. Ronan grunted, locking his legs around Crow's waist, trying to choke him with his one good arm. Crow gouged at Ronan's eyes, his other hand trying to bring the pistol to bear for a kill shot. Clara stood frozen for a split second. The scream of the crowd faded into a dull roar in her ears. She saw Crow's gun hand inching inward, the muzzle turning toward Ronan's chest. Ronan's strength was failing. The wound in his shoulder had torn open. Fresh blood was soaking his sling. He couldn't hold the bigger man much longer. Clara dropped the ledger. She raised the Winchester. Her hands were shaking. Don't hit Ronan! Don't hit Ronan! She took a breath. She thought of the cottonwood tree. She thought of the steady, unyielding earth. She exhaled. Crack! The rifle shot was deafening at this range. Crow screamed. His pistol flew from his hand, spinning away into the dust. His right hand was a ruin of shattered bone and blood. Ronan rolled away, gasping for air. He kicked the pistol further away, then collapsed onto his back, his chest heaving. Crow writhed in the dirt, clutching his mangled hand, keening like a wounded animal. Silence slammed back down onto the square. It was heavy, absolute silence. Clara lowered the rifle. The barrel smoked. She felt cold, ice cold, all over. She had shot a man. She had used violence. But as she looked at Noah, who was staring at her with wide, awestruck eyes, she felt no regret. Sheriff Dwyer stepped forward. He kicked Crow in the ribs, flipping him over. Silas Crow, Dwyer said, his voice weary. You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and being a general son of a bitch. Two deputies rushed forward to drag Crow up. Another group hauled a disheveled and weeping Lark out of the alley. Clara didn't watch them. She dropped the rifle and ran to Ronan. She fell to her knees in the dust beside him. Ronan, she whispered, her hands hovering over his face. Ronan, he opened his eyes. They were swollen, and his lip was split, but he was smiling. A crooked, bloody, beautiful smile. You shoot. Very well. For a farm girl. He wheezed. Clara laughed, a sound that was half sob. She ripped a strip from her petticoat and pressed it against his bleeding lip. "And you fight very poorly for a warrior." "Strategy," Ronan murmured, closing his eyes. "I let him tire himself out." Clara looked up. Noah had been cut loose. He ran to them, throwing his arms around Clara's neck, burying his face in her shoulder. She held him tight, feeling his small frame shake with sobs. "It is over, Noah," she whispered into his hair. "It is over. We are safe." She looked around the square. The townspeople were still standing there, but the anger was gone. In its place was something else. Shame, mostly. They looked at their boots. They looked at the ground. They looked at the man lying in the dust who had offered his life for a white boy, and the woman who had stood against the whole town to save him. The old rancher who had challenged Crow took off his hat. He walked over to where Clara knelt. "Miss Whitmore," he said gruffly, We owe you an apology, and him." He nodded at Ronan. "We were wrong." Clara looked at him, then at the others. She stood up, helping Ronan to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his arm over her shoulders. She took Noah's hand. They stood there, the three of them, a farm girl, a Navajo warrior, and a boy united against a backdrop of fading light. They were covered in dust and blood. They were exhausted, but they were standing. Clara looked the town in the eye. She did not smile. She did not offer forgiveness. Not yet. "Go home," Clara said to them. "Go home and look at your families, and think about what you almost did today." She turned Ronan toward the doctor's office. The crowd parted for them, creating a wide, respectful path. As they walked, Clara felt Ronan's weight against her. It felt heavy. Yes, but it also felt right. It felt like an anchor in a world that had been drifting for too long. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, plunging the street into twilight. But for the first time in a long time, Clara was not afraid of the dark. She had the truth. She had her family. And she had the man who walked beside her. From the window of the sheriff's office, Amos Dwyer watched them go. He pulled the crumpled page of the ledger from his pocket, the page with his name on it, and struck a match. He watched it burn until it touched his fingertips, then dropped the ash onto the floor. "Clean slate," he muttered to the empty room. "Clean slate for all of us." But outside, the wind was picking up again, blowing through the cottonwood trees, singing a song of change. The Old West was dying, killed by ledgers and telegraphs and laws. But something new was being born in the dust of Red Mesa, something that looked a lot like hope. The adrenaline that had fueled the confrontation in the town square did not fade gently. It crashed, leaving behind a profound and aching exhaustion. Red Mesa did not celebrate the fall of Silas Crow and Ephraim Lark with parades or speeches. Instead, a heavy, embarrassed silence settled over the town, like the dust that coated the storefronts after a summer storm. The townspeople retreated into their homes, closing their shutters, unable to meet the eyes of the woman and the warrior they had almost lynched. In the office of Dr. Pembroke, the air smelled of rubbing alcohol and old tobacco. The doctor, a man with shaking hands but a kind heart, finished binding Ronan's ribs. "You are lucky, son," the doctor said, wiping his spectacles on his vest. "Another inch to the left, and that bullet would have nicked the lung. As it is, you just have a hole in your side and a face that looks like it went 10 rounds with a mule." Ronan sat on the examination table, his chest wrapped in clean white linen. He winced as he pulled his tunic back on, but his face remained impassive. "I have had worse," he said quietly. Clara stood by the window, watching the street. Noah sat in the corner, holding a cold compress to his bruised cheek, his eyes darting between his sister and the man who had saved him. "You should stay in town tonight," the doctor advised, looking at Clara. "Let him rest." "No," Clara said, turning from the window. Her voice was soft but unyielding. "We are going home. The air in this town is not good for breathing." They left Red Mesa as the moon began to rise. No one came out to say goodbye. No one offered an apology, save for the sheriff, who stood on his porch and touched the brim of his hat as they passed. It was a silent acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. The ride back to the ranch was slow. The night was cold. The desert floor washed in silver light. Clara rode Bess, with Noah sitting behind her, his arms wrapped tight around her waist. Ronan rode the Mustang beside them. They did not speak. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the weight of what had happened and the terrifying uncertainty of what was to come. When they reached the ranch, the familiar shapes of the barn and the house looked different to Clara. They were no longer just wood and stone. They were a fortress she had defended. They were a home she had almost lost. She helped Ronan down from his horse. He stumbled slightly, his strength finally failing him. She guided him not to the barn, but to the house. "You will sleep in the extra room tonight," Clara said. "Not the hayloft." Ronan started to protest. "Clara, it is not proper. I stopped caring about what is proper when I aimed a rifle at a man's chest." Clara cut him off. "You are wounded. You sleep inside." That night, the house was quiet. Noah fell asleep instantly, exhausted by the trauma of the day. Clara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of the man in the next room. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. The danger was over. The villains were in chains. But the real battle, she realized, was just beginning. The battle to return to a life that no longer fit the woman she had become. The next morning broke with a deceptive calm. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in soft pastels of pink and orange. Clara made coffee and biscuits. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, like a family. But the tension was there, a thin wire stretched tight. Ronan pushed his plate away. He looked at Clara, his dark eyes serious. "I must go," he said. Clara's hand froze halfway to her cup. She set it down carefully. "You are not healed. Ronan, your stitches—" "My wounds will heal," Ronan said. "But my people do not know if I am alive or dead. They do not know that the lie has been broken. I must tell them. I must stop the young men from riding out for revenge." Clara nodded. She knew this moment was coming. She knew he could not stay. He was a warrior of the Dine. He belonged to the high mesas and the deep canyons, not to a fenced ranch house. "I understand," Clara said. "I will ride with you to the edge of the canyon," Noah said suddenly, sitting up straighter. Ronan looked at the boy. He saw the bruise on Noah's cheek, a badge of honor from a fight that was not his own. He smiled, a genuine softening of his harsh features. "No, little warrior," Ronan said. "You stay here. You guard the land. You guard your sister. That is the job of the man of the house." Noah flushed with pride. He nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." Clara walked Ronan out to the porch. The Mustang was saddled and waiting. The air was crisp, smelling of sage and damp earth. They stood there for a long moment, the distance between them filled with unsaid words. Clara wanted to ask him to stay. She wanted to tell him that the house felt too big without him, but she swallowed the words. She would not chain him. A wild thing caged is a wild thing dead. "Will you be safe?" Clara asked, looking at his bandaged shoulder. "Safe is a word for children," Ronan said. "I will be careful." He stepped closer to her. He did not embrace her. He did not kiss her. Instead, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and calloused. He held her hand for a long time, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. It was a touch that burned, more intimate than any kiss she had ever imagined. "You saved my life. Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice low and rough. "You gave me back my name." "You saved us too," Clara whispered. "I must go to the council," Ronan said. "I must explain why I brought the white man's war to our doorstep. They will be angry. They will be suspicious. I must make them understand." "Tell them the truth," Clara said. "The truth is a strong weapon." Ronan looked deep into her eyes. "I will come back." It was a simple promise, 3 words. But the way he said it with the weight of a vow, with the intensity of a man who did not waste breath on lies, made Clara's knees weak. "I will be here," she said. He mounted his horse. He did not look back. He rode west, toward the jagged line of the red rocks, disappearing into the vast landscape that was his soul. Clara watched him go until he was nothing but a speck of dust on the horizon. Then, and only then, did she let the first tear fall. The days that followed were a test of endurance of a different kind. It was the endurance of silence. The ranch returned to its rhythm. The chickens needed feeding. The fence needed mending. The water trough needed filling. Clara threw herself into the work with a frantic energy. She scrubbed the floors until her knees were raw. She chopped wood until her arms shook. She needed to be tired. She needed to be too exhausted to think, too exhausted to feel the gaping hole in the center of her life. Noah was different. He was no longer the boy who played with wooden soldiers. He worked beside her with a quiet focus. He cleaned the rifle every night, not with fear, but with respect. He had seen the worst of men, and he had seen the best. He had chosen his path. "Do you think he will come back?" Noah asked one evening as they sat on the porch shucking corn. Clara looked at the sunset, bleeding purple across the sky. "He said he would." "Mr. Henderson in town said an Indian never keeps his word to a white man," Noah said, frowning. "Mr. Henderson is a fool who sells weevil-infested flour," Clara said sharply. "Ronan is not an Indian to us. Noah, he is Ronan, and he keeps his word, but doubt, like a weed, has deep roots." At night, when the wind howled around the eaves, Clara lay awake and wondered. She wondered if the tribal elders had forbidden him to return. She wondered if he had looked at her a white woman, a symbol of the encroachment that was destroying his world, and realized that they could never truly be together. She wondered if she was just a chapter in his story, a storm he had weathered, while he was the whole book of hers. She felt like an outsider in her own skin. She walked the boundary of her land, looking at the vast emptiness to the west, feeling small and fragile. She had stood up to a mob, but she was terrified of a broken heart. A week passed, then two. News came from Mateo Reyes. He stopped his wagon by the gate, tipping his hat with a grin. "The federal investigators are in Red Mesa," Mateo reported, handing Clara a sack of sugar. "They are turning Lark's office upside down. Found papers hidden in the floorboards. Lark is singing like a canary, trying to blame everything on Crow. And Crow, well, Crow is sitting in a cell in Santa Fe, staring at the wall." "And the land?" Clara asked. "The foreclosure notices have been suspended," Mateo said. "The governor has ordered a full review of all water rights claims in the territory. Your land is safe." "Clara, for now." "For now," Clara repeated. "It is the West, amiga," Mateo said with a shrug. "Nothing is forever, but today is a good day." He hesitated, looking at her. No word from the West. Clara shook her head. "No." Mateo nodded sympathetically. "Give it time. The wheels of the council turn slow, and he has much to prove to them. To prove that you are not a trap." After Mateo left, Clara walked to the creek bed. The water was still low, but it was running clear. She looked at the giant cottonwood tree, its leaves shimmering gold in the afternoon light. It had stood here for 100 years. It had seen drought and flood, peace and war. It endured because its roots went deep. Clara went to the shed and got a shovel. She dug a hole near the base of the old giant. It was hard work. The ground was packed tight. When the hole was deep enough, she went to the garden and dug up a young sapling she had been nurturing in a pot, a cutting from the great tree itself. She planted the sapling in the hole, packing the dark earth around its roots. She watered it from the creek. "Grow," she whispered to the small, fragile thing. "Grow strong." It was an act of faith, planting a tree in a land that wanted to kill it. It was her answer to the fear. She was not going to run. She was not going to sell. She was planting her roots. If Ronan came back, he would find her standing. If he did not, she would still be standing. The sun began to dip low on the 16th day. Clara was on the porch, mending a bridle. Noah was inside, reading a book by the light of the fire. The wind shifted. Clara looked up. She didn't hear hoofbeats. She didn't see dust. But she felt it, a change in the air pressure, a vibration in the earth that hummed against the soles of her boots. She stood up, the bridle falling from her lap. She walked to the railing. far to the west, where the sun was turning the horizon into a forge of molten gold. A rider appeared. He was not riding fast. He was riding at a walk, a steady, measured pace. He was not hunched over the saddle like a fugitive. He sat tall. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She held her breath, afraid that if she exhaled, the image would vanish like a mirage. The rider came closer. She could see the white markings of the Mustang. She could see the dark hair blowing in the wind. She could see the flash of silver on his belt. It was him. Noah came out onto the porch. "Is it?" "Stay here," Clara whispered. She stepped off the porch. She walked across the yard, past the well, past the gate. She walked out onto the open prairie to meet him. Ronan pulled the Mustang up 10 feet from her. He looked different. The bandage was gone from his arm. He wore a clean tunic of dark blue velvet, and around his neck was a heavy necklace of turquoise and silver. He looked like a prince of the desert. He dismounted. His movement was fluid, the stiffness gone. He dropped the reins, letting the horse stand. He walked toward her. His face was serious, but his eyes were warm. They were full of the sunset. "You came back," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I said I would," Ronan replied. "The council?" Clara asked. "It was difficult," Ronan admitted. "There was much anger. They said I had brought the eyes of the white man upon our secret places. They said a white woman could never understand our heart." "And what did you say?" Ronan stopped in front of her. He was close enough now that she could smell the scent of pinon smoke and leather that clung to him. "I told them that the heart does not have a color," Ronan said. "I told them that bravery does not speak only one language. I told them that the woman who saved me has a spirit as old and deep as the canyon." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a silver bracelet, hammered thin and delicate, etched with the pattern of flowing water. "My mother made this," Ronan said. "She gave it to me before I rode out. She said that if a woman can hold a gun to save a life, she can hold the future." Clara held out her wrist. Her hand was steady now. Ronan slipped the bracelet onto her arm. The silver was cool against her skin. "I am not a rich man. Clara," Ronan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have no land deed. I have no cattle. But I have my hands, I have my honor, and I have a love for you that is wider than this sky." Clara looked at him. She saw the scars on his face, the lines of hardship, the history of a people fighting to survive, and she saw the man who had looked at her across a barn loft and seen her worth. "I do not need cattle," Clara said softly. "And I have enough land for both of us. What I need, what I want, is a partner. Someone to watch the storm with me." Ronan smiled. It was the smile of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side carrying water. "Then I am here," he said. "I am home." He did not kiss her then. Not yet. That was for later, for the quiet of the fireside. Instead, he took her hand again, interlacing his fingers with hers. He turned, and together they looked at the ranch house, where the yellow light of the lantern spilled out onto the porch, and where Noah stood waving. The sun finally set, and the first star appeared in the indigo sky. It was bright and unwavering. "Come," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "Supper is waiting." They walked back toward the house, two shadows merging into one in the twilight, the farm girl and the warrior, the past and the future. They walked out of the legend and into the simple, hard, beautiful reality of a life chosen together. Behind them, by the creek, the young cottonwood sapling drank the cool earth, ready to grow. The lantern light on the porch flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the weathered wood of the house. The night was vast and silent, save for the distant, mournful cry of a coyote and the steady chirping of crickets in the tall grass. Clara Whitmore sat on the railing, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the chill of the high desert evening. Ronan stood a few feet away, leaning against the support post. He was looking at the house, but his gaze was soft, unfocused, as if he were seeing something beyond the timber and the stone. He looked at the window where the warm yellow glow spilled out, framing the silhouette of Noah, Who was reading at the kitchen table? It had been 3 days since Ronan had returned. 3 days of quiet adjustments, of relearning the rhythm of a life shared. He had worked beside her in the fields, mending the fences that the wind had loosened, his movements efficient and silent. But tonight, there was a different weight to his silence. He turned to look at her. The moonlight caught the silver bracelet he had given her, the metal gleaming against her wrist. "I used to look at houses like this and see only fences," Ronan said, his voice low and rumbling like distant thunder. "I saw walls meant to keep the world out, meant to keep my people out." Clara looked at him, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "And what do you see now?" Ronan pushed off the post and took a step toward her. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of holding reins and rifles, but his touch was reverent. "I see a hearth," he said simply. "I see a place where the fire does not burn to destroy, but to warm." He looked deep into her eyes, and Clara felt the breath catch in her throat. The danger of the past weeks, the gunshots, the chases, the screaming mobs felt like a lifetime ago. What remained was this: a man and a woman standing on the edge of the wilderness, deciding how to survive the peace. "You saved my life, Clara," Ronan said. "When I was bleeding in the dirt, you gave me water. But it is more than that. The war, the hate, it eats at a man. It turns his heart into stone. You saved the part of me that is still human." Clara placed her hand over his, pressing it against her cheek. "You saved me too. Ronan, I was drowning in this land. I was so afraid of losing it that I forgot how to live on it." Ronan took a breath. He reached into the pocket of his tunic and pulled out a small object. It was not a ring of gold. Gold was the metal of the men who tore up the earth. It was a ring of silver, hammered by hand, inlaid with a single, small piece of turquoise that was the color of the cloudless noon sky. "I have nothing to offer you that a banker would value," Ronan said. "I have no herds of cattle. I have no chest of coins. My name is spoken with suspicion in the town." He took her left hand. "I do not promise you an easy life. Clara Whitmore, the winter will still be cold. The drought will still come. There will be men who look at us with hate in their eyes." He paused, his thumb brushing over her ring finger. "But I promise you a real life. I promise you that you will never walk the canyon alone. I promise that when the wind blows, I will be the rock beside you." He looked at her, his dark eyes vulnerable and fierce all at once. "Will you be my wife? Will you be the one who shares my fire?" Clara looked at the ring, then up at his face. Her heart swelled, pushing against her ribs, full of a love that was terrified and brave all at once. It would be so easy to say yes, to melt into his arms, but she was Clara Whitmore. She was the woman who had stood down a lynch mob. She straightened her spine. She kept her hand in his, but she did not let him slide the ring on yet. "I will," Clara said, her voice clear and firm. "But I have conditions. Ronan be gay." Ronan blinked, surprised, and then a slow, crooked smile touched his lips. "Conditions. This ranch is my father's legacy, and it is Noah's future," Clara said. "I will not be a silent woman who walks 3 paces behind her husband, and I will not be a fragile flower kept in the parlor. If we do this, we do it as partners, equal. I work the land, you work the land. I have a voice in the decisions, and Noah remains my charge until he is a man." She looked at him with a challenge in her eyes. "I am not looking for a master, Ronan. I am looking for a teammate." Ronan laughed. It was a genuine, joyous sound that startled the horses in the corral. He shook his head, looking at her with an admiration that burned brighter than desire. "A teammate," he repeated. "A partner." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, cool and solid. "That is the only reason I chose you, Clara," he whispered, pulling her close. "Because you are the only one strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me." He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, stolen kiss of the fugitive in the shepherd's shack. It was a claim. It was a promise. It tasted of the night air and sweet tobacco and forever. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in late October. It was not a grand affair. There was no organ music, no cathedral. They stood beneath the great cottonwood tree by the creek, the yellow leaves falling around them like gold coins showered from heaven. The guests were a strange and motley gathering, a tableau of the changing West. On one side stood the few people from Red Mesa who had chosen conscience over prejudice. Mateo Reyes was there, wearing his finest embroidered jacket, holding his hat over his heart. Dr. Pembroke stood beside him, looking frail but dignified. Mrs. Hattie, the apothecary, wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sheriff Amos Dwyer stood at the back, leaning on his shotgun, watching the perimeter with a protective scowl that softened only when he looked at the couple. On the other side stood a dozen riders of the Dine. They sat on their horses or stood with their arms crossed, wrapped in blankets of geometric patterns. They were Ronan's cousins, his friends, men who had ridden with him in the old days. They looked at the white guests with stoic reserve, but they were there. Their presence was a silent statement. He is ours, and he chooses her, so we will witness. Noah stood between them, the ring-bearer. He wore a suit that Clara had cut down from her father's old Sunday best. He looked solemn and proud, a boy bridging two worlds. The officiant was a circuit preacher who had been passing through the territory. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between the Navajo warriors and the sheriff, but his voice was steady as he read from the book. "Do you, Ronan?" the preacher began. "I do," Ronan said. His voice carried across the creek, clear and unashamed. He wore his best tunic, and his hair was bound with a red cloth. He looked like a king of the earth. "Do you, Clara?" "I do," Clara said. She wore a dress of simple blue calico, clean and pressed. She held a bouquet of late-blooming sage and desert marigolds. When they were pronounced man and wife, a cheer went up from Mateo and Hattie. The Navajo riders did not cheer, but they raised their fists in a silent salute, a gesture of respect that meant more than noise. The feast that followed was a study in contrasts. On the long trestle tables set up in the yard, roasted venison sat beside cornbread. Mutton stew simmered in a pot next to apple pie. For the first hour, the two groups stayed separate, eyeing each other over their tin plates. But hunger and curiosity are powerful forces. It started with Noah. He walked over to one of the Navajo elders, a man with a face like a dried riverbed, and offered him a piece of pie. The elder took it, tasted it, and nodded approvingly. In return, he cut a slice of dried meat from his pouch and offered it to the boy. Soon, Mateo was talking to a young brave about horses, using hand signals in broken Spanish. Hattie was examining the weave of a blanket, asking a Navajo woman how she achieved the red dye. The sheriff was sharing tobacco with Ronan's cousin. It was not perfect harmony. There were still awkward pauses, still glances of misunderstanding. But for one afternoon, under the shade of the cottonwood, the line between us and them blurred. Clara stood on the porch, watching the scene. Ronan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They are eating each other's food," he noted, sounding amused. "It is a start," Clara said, leaning back into him. "It is hard to hate someone when you are sharing a pie." "Crow would have hated the pie," Ronan murmured. "Crow is currently breaking rocks in the territorial prison," Clara said with satisfaction. "And Lark is back east, ruined and penniless. We don't speak of them today." "No," Ronan agreed. "Today we speak of the future." The future came slowly, like the turning of the seasons. Winter descended on the territory, cold and biting. But inside the Whitmore Ranch, now the Whitmore Begay Ranch. Though the sign just said The Crossing, the fire burned bright. The house changed. It was no longer a fortress of solitude. It became a place of noise and life. Ronan brought his rugs and his silver working tools into the main room. In the evenings, while Clara mended or did the accounts, Ronan would sit by the fire, hammering silver or repairing tack. He taught Noah how to track in the snow. He taught him the stories of the coyote and the spider woman, And in return, Noah read to him from the history books, teaching Ronan the laws and the letters of the world that was encroaching on them. It wasn't always easy. There were days when Ronan looked out at the snow-covered mountains with a longing that made Clara's heart ache. There were days when a traveler would stop for water, see Ronan, and spit on the ground before riding off. There were moments of cultural friction arguments about how to train a horse or how to discipline the dog, where their backgrounds clashed like flint and steel. But they learned to make sparks, not fires that burned the house down. They learned to talk. They learned that love was not just a feeling, but a daily practice of translation and compromise. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the creek into a rushing torrent, the ranch had transformed. They opened the trading post in the old barn. It was Clara's idea, but Ronan made it work. It became a neutral ground. Navajo weavers brought their blankets and rugs. White settlers brought tools, flour, and coffee. They traded. At first, it was tense, but fair prices and honest scales have a way of soothing bad blood. Ronan stood behind the counter, weighing wool with a scrupulous honesty that shamed the cheat. Clara managed the books and the inventory. The crossing became a place where a white rancher might buy a saddle made by a Navajo leather worker and realize it was the best gear he had ever owned. It became a place where a Navajo grandmother might buy a steel cooking pot and nod her thanks to the white woman who sold it. It was small commerce. It was justice in ounces and pounds. One morning in late May, 6 months after the wedding, Clara woke early. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the desert in hues of violet and rose. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her robe around her. The air was sweet with the scent of wet earth and new grass. The cottonwood tree was fully in leaf, a shimmering canopy of green. Next to it, the sapling she had planted was thriving, its young branches reaching for the sky. Ronan came out a moment later, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He was bare-chested, the scar on his shoulder a pale line against his skin, a memory of the violence that had brought them together. He handed her a mug and stood beside her, his arm going around her waist. "The creek is running high," he observed. "It will be a good year for the grass." "Noah wants to plant corn in the lower field," Clara said. "He says you promised to show him the traditional way to dig the irrigation rows." "I did," Ronan nodded. "The boy has a good back for work." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "He is happy. Ronan, he laughs now. I had not heard him laugh like that since our parents died." "He feels safe," Ronan said. "A boy needs to know that the walls will hold." "And you?" Clara asked, looking up at him. "Do you feel safe?" Ronan looked out at the vast, open expanse of the New Mexico territory. He looked at the road leading to town, where the dust was settling. He looked at the trading post, where a wagon was already pulling up, a Navajo family coming to trade. He looked down at Clara, at the woman who had stitched his flesh, saved his life, and opened her home to him. "I feel free," Ronan said. "I used to think freedom was running where no one could find you. Now I know freedom is choosing where you stand." He kissed her forehead. "And I stand here with my beloved bride." Clara smiled, the warmth of the sun matching the warmth in her chest. "Welcome home, warrior," she whispered. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun rise fully over the mountains. The light hit the red earth, turning it into a landscape of fire and gold. It was a hard land. It was a dangerous land. But as the wind blew through the cottonwood leaves, whispering stories of the past and songs of the future, Clara knew they would endure. They had found the rarest thing in the Wild West, a happy ending that was true. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Clara and Ronan as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Are you on a ranch in Montana, a bustling city in London, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story. If you want to hear more tales of the frontier, of love and survival under the western sun, Please subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Thank you.